Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to docket number 240803, the annual non-residential renewable energy solutions program review, year 4. We are here for a technical meeting in this matter. I'm joined virtually by my colleagues, Vice Chairman Jack McCoskey and Commissioner David Arconti. We have an agenda in front of us today. Looking forward to a presentation, joint presentation from our colleagues at Eversource and UI. Then our goal is to lead topic by topic discussions. We have a topic for legislative changes for incremental capacity. We have to talk about the addition of the school solar program, any other programmatic changes that folks are recommending, and some discussion of the interconnection report filed by the EDCs. Before we adjourn today, we will pause for any public comments before we adjourn. Just by way of general opening remarks, for anyone who has not attended a PURA virtual hearing before, please remember to identify yourself by name and affiliation the first time that you speak for clarity of our record. We do have a court reporter with us today, so please refrain from using the chat function, as that's not part of the official record. Any questions, comments, etc. need to be posed verbally. You can do so by locating the raised hand function under the reactions tab, which is towards the bottom right of the screen. And again, we will have time for questions and comments throughout the agenda. We are broadcasting to our YouTube channel, so can see folks over there as well. After the joint presentation from the utilities, we will turn immediately to questions from the staff, and then there will be the facilitated discussion and time for other stakeholder questions and comments. So without further ado, let me welcome to the virtual stage our presentation teams from Eversource and UI. I see a number of folks already up and on the screen. So let me pick on Mr. DeBacchus to let me know if you are wanting us to do the slides, or if you would like your team to.
If you could do the slides, that would be wonderful.
Great. So I'll give Mr. Pumpin just a second to pull those up. And in the meantime, the floor is yours.
Yeah, and just to make sure we understand the intent, are we doing our whole presentation all the way through and then saving the time for discussion afterwards, or are we presenting on our slides individually on the individual topics?
Oh, great question. Let me ask my staff if there is a preference. Mr. Kavanaugh?
I think you can just go all the way through and then we can ask at the end.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks for the question. Yeah, and we'll get the slides pulled back up for the topic by topic discussion. So go for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Aaron DeBacchus, Manager of Operations for Connecticut Renewable Programs at Eversource. I'm joined today by Brian Rice, Director of Customer Solar Programs at Eversource, as well as Christy Prescott, who's the Director of Wholesale Power at UI, and John King, who's an analyst on the Wholesale Power team at United Illuminating. The next slide, please. So our presentation will be brief, but here you can see the topics we intend to touch on. We'll talk about the minimal red line edits proposed to the NRES program rules. We'll talk about our proposed methodology for the legislative change that has the potential to add more capacity in a given program year. Then we'll get a little bit into the legislation for school, solar, and storage. And lastly, we'll talk about some suggested changes in the small category, which were largely based off of written comments we saw submitted from other stakeholders. The next slide, please. So as I just mentioned, we did have some minor edits that we proposed via red line in a recent filing in this docket. First, we added some language to the RFP just to clarify that only retail rates listed in the price cap chart for netting projects are eligible for participation in the program. And just for some additional context on that point, we had some questions on the eligibility of electric vehicle rates, and both the UI and Eversource EV rate riders are not eligible for the program. So just for additional clarity, we wanted to add some language that only the approved rates and caps in the RFP document can participate in the program. We also added some minor language in for clarifying that a single project cannot receive compensation from this program or any other ratepayer funded subsidy. This is not a new concept. It's a concept that's existed in Connecticut programs for years, and there's actually existing language, but we just wanted to make sure there was no question about the different scenarios that might arise. So we simply added the words seek to receive into a section to make it clear that the project cannot bid into more than one ratepayer funded program at the same time, meaning they can't seek to receive compensation from both by bidding into both at the same time. And a change that's a bit more administrative in nature was the addition of language to require the use of the current year's bid certification forms. That's always been the way the EDCs have administered the program, but to formalize the requirement in the RFP, we wanted to add that language in, and that's a question we do get every year. And next, we have some definition changes and one additional definition that we felt was important. So we went ahead and modified the definition of new construction, and as a lot of folks know, new construction was a concept that was carried over from LREC-ZREC. And that definition doesn't completely fit the NRES program and really only fits netting projects at this stage. So we changed it to make it more viable for the NRES program by clarifying that the designation shall mean a project that will serve load and or be associated with a new electric account that has not received service as of the date of bid submission. And in conjunction with that revised new construction definition, we also added the term by-all production meter for additional clarity on new construction scenarios and the installation of by-all production meters, with the main point that being that even though by-all projects require the installation of a new service for generation monitoring, it doesn't necessarily mean that the project is given the new construction designation. So new construction in the by-all scenario should be used for projects being associated with a brand new electric account, which is different than simply adding a new service to an already existing electric account. And if you're associating a by-all with an existing account, even though a new service is required for the by-all production meter, it's not considered a new construction project. And lastly, we proposed language to better clarify the eligibility of submitting multiple bids on a single parcel of land in a single solicitation. Netting, largely the same as it has been, is one bid per revenue meter. Fairly straightforward to enforce. Netting projects are inherently behind the meter and are required to be sized to load, which was the original basis for incentivizing project participation in the NRES program. By-all's a little less straightforward, not being behind the meter and in some cases not associated with any load. So we added proposed language to clarify that we'd evaluate one by-all bid per parcel in any single solicitation. We have received quite a few bids in the past that appeared to be split projects submitted in the small category as rooftop by-all on the same parcel. And to remove any ambiguity on what was and wasn't allowable in a single solicitation, we felt that was beneficial for all parties involved. Next slide, please. So next, we'll get into the legislative change that can potentially add incremental capacity. So Public Act 2431 established legislation that potentially allows additional capacity beyond the annual statutory allotment to be added for project selection in a given program year. And so this is a look at our proposed methodology. What it comes down to is a comparison of aggregate compensation year over year. And for by-alls, the compensation is simply the purchase price multiplied by the project's estimated average annual production. Excuse me. And for netting, it's the combination of the REC price, if there is one, times average annual production, plus the energy price times average annual production. And if the aggregate compensation from the previous year exceeds the aggregate compensation from the current year, additional capacity can be added to the current year. And to determine the amount of the additional capacity that would be available, we would divide the positive difference in aggregate compensation by the cost of 1 megawatt of solar at the small zero by-all rate, and any newly available capacity in our proposal would be sent to the small zero sector. The next slide, please. So here's an example of that calculation, and these are all mock numbers, and none of these are numbers that are associated with any of the solicitations. But for example, in 2024, if you had $5 million in aggregate compensation, in 2025, you had $3.5 million in aggregate compensation. That leaves you a positive difference of 1.5 million. You take the approximate average annual production of a 1 megawatt solar project, which ends up being 1,314 megawatts. megawatt hours, excuse me, and then divide that or multiply that by the small zero price. The buy all price of small zero is $199.82 per megawatt hour. So it leaves you that for a cost of about $262,000. So if you divide that into the 1.5 million, you get about 5.71 megawatts of excess capacity. And in our proposal, we would send that to the small category in an 80-20 split, Eversource and UI. Next slide, please. And I'm going to turn it over to John King from United Illuminating to talk about the school solar legislative change.
Good morning, everyone. John King here from United Illuminating. I'm going to talk about the legislative changes from school for school solar. Upon the EDC's review of Public Act 24-151, the EDCs believe implementation of the school solar would make most sense under a separate category, similar to our separate size categories, large, low, medium, and small, under the existing NRES program to reduce complexity and confusion. The newly created school category would follow the same RFP schedule and rules of the existing NRES program. The school category would follow the similar 80-20 split between Eversource and UI, where all of the available megawatts would be allocated to one RFP window. This is to allow projects to submit at the maximum size allowed in the NRES program. The EDCs seek additional comments on if a school solar project would be restricted into submitting into a school solar category, or if they would be allowed to submit into the existing small, medium, large, and low categories as well. Next slide, please.
I'm covering this one. Good morning. So we wanted to dive into discussion of programmatic changes and the experience of customers in the small zero emission category, because there were a number of comments submitted on this subject by participants in the proceeding. I'll start off by saying, I mean, we are well aware that right now participation in the small zero emission category can be a frustrating experience for those customers that are seeking to build small projects and participate in the NRES program. In the past year, we have implemented changes to try to improve this. We went back to the 2-week window, which was a positive change to have a kind of a fairer process for enrolling projects. But that said, the small category does remain substantially oversubscribed, as covered in the last technical meeting. So it's effectively become a lottery to be able to get an award as a small project less than 200 kW. In terms of further changes, we do want to continue reviewing all projects that apply as long as the category remains substantially oversubscribed. We're mindful that we have projects that are applying over and over again because they often don't get selected. And we're really concerned about a scenario in which a project applies twice and is not really reviewed simply because they didn't have a favorable position in the queue after the 2-week window. And then say if they apply the third time and are fortunate enough to be sorted higher in the queue, but then get eliminated due to eligibility issues, that's just going to be a further frustrating experience for those customers and developers trying to participate. Because if they had been reviewed in prior solicitations, they would have had an opportunity to correct eligibility issues for subsequent submissions. Additionally, all submissions are providing a bid fee. So we feel that if we're taking a project's bid fee, it's appropriate that we conduct the review of the project and identify any eligibility issues for the customer and the developer to address. I think, and there was also a discussion of sizing requirements. Again, the authority did a thorough evaluation of sizing requirements for netting projects in the small category in the last annual review. And we thought appropriately recognized that allowing oversized netting projects to participate in the small category could have adverse impacts to program objectives. Specifically, it would enable netting projects to potentially get a much higher level of compensation based on the rate class that they participated in. So we think that the program appropriately only allows oversized buy all projects to participate in the small category. And we wouldn't recommend changing that. All that said, we do think this is an important category, and we're not excited about the negative experience that a lot of customers are having. The small category is predominantly sought after by small businesses, institutions in Connecticut that are seeking to use solar energy to directly serve their on-site needs. So it's a really valuable choice for businesses and institutions to manage their energy needs, manage their energy costs. And we understand that they're frustrated when that option is closed out to them because of oversubscription. The small projects are also the projects that can often move forward and get built and start contributing clean energy to Connecticut most quickly. It's not universally, but often they don't require the type of substantial system upgrades that a large multi-megawatt standalone project would require. So we want to continue working on this category and easing the frustrations. That's a big reason why we're recommending that if any incremental capacity can be awarded due to legislative changes, that it be reserved for the small category to provide more opportunities for these customers. And if there are additional changes that can be made, potentially increasing the amount of capacity for the category, potentially opportunities could open up through legislative changes. We are all ears and interested in any reasonable steps that can be done to improve the experience for small businesses and institutions that want to install solar. So, next slide. Great, that's it. So I think the EDCs are happy to take any questions at this point, or reserve questions for the topic by topic portion of the agenda.
Excellent. Thank you so much to the presentation team. I'm just going to start opening up to questions from authority staff first. And we have Mr. Kavanaugh up. So let's go ahead and take questions topic by topic. So we'll go through the authority staff topic by topic. Mr. Kavanaugh, any questions on our first topic of incremental capacity legislative changes?
From me, no.
Great. Mr. Arpin, any on this topic?
Yes, I have a couple of questions on this topic of incremental capacity. So I would like to thank the EDCs for their presentation on this topic. I would like to turn to slide 4, please, Mr. Bumpin. So my question here, if an NRES project were subsequently withdrawn or canceled after bid selection, how would this affect the EDC's year-over-year compensation comparison, if at all?
Yeah, I think that would be up for discussion, whether or not it would be only, submitted projects or only selected projects. I know there was a written comment submitted about getting pure approval on all selected projects and using that list. I think we'd be open to the various, suggestions that might come up with regard to that, whether it just be selected or submitted or all projects. That hasn't been fully vetted yet.
To follow up, do the EDCs have a specific preference in whether it would be selected or submitted, or are the EDCs still thinking that through?
I think it makes the most sense to probably do selected. At this point, it's not a fully vetted thought, but I think selected probably makes the most sense.
Thank you for that response. So my next question on this topic, if competitive bid categories were granted incremental capacity, would this affect the EDC's annual bid price recommendations? And if so, could the EDCs please clarify how the bid price recommendations would be affected?
It wouldn't affect, so based on the previous methodology that we've used for submitting bid price caps, it wouldn't impact the price caps. If the additional capacity were added to small based on the existing, the previously established methodology for year 2 and year 3, at this point, that would be the answer that we would give. It shouldn't impact the calculation for the price caps.
To follow up, would it impact the price cap recommendations if they were hypothetically allocated to the competitive bid price categories instead of small?
Yes, that would alter the calculation.
Okay, thank you for that response. And those are all my questions on this topic. So I turn back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Charles, any questions on this topic?
Nothing from me on this topic. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. So we're going to stay with this topic. Are there stakeholders with questions or comments on this topic? You can get into the queue by using the raise hand function under the reactions tab at the bottom of the screen. Mr. Ford.
Good morning, everyone. My name is George Ford, and I am with Select Energy. We are a commercial industrial solar developer throughout the Northeast. First, I want to thank everyone for putting this together. I think it's been very helpful having these stakeholder meetings. And I want to also extend, because most times people don't talk nicely about utilities. So I do want to thank Aaron and the team, both at the Eversource organization and UI, over the years that I've been doing solar here in Connecticut, which has been going on 12 or 13 years now. I have always had the utmost respect for the teams at each of the utilities. They're very fair, they're open-minded, they see the angst that developers go through. And many of you probably have heard the term solar coaster over the years. And for us, it is difficult in these type of situations, excuse me, where we go out. And I just want to give some breadth and clarity to the discussion about specifically the small category where, we go out, we do a tremendous amount of work, at least from our side at Select. When we put a customer into one of these programs, we have gone through the full vetting process with our customers. We're not just there to say, throw your name in the hat and let's see if you get picked. Those are the old days, right, when the program first started. Today, we know, and I do also want to commend how the program is set up today, that you have to have some skin in the game, right? You got to pay an application fee. I think Brian's comments about having the projects reviewed is good because, again, we are paying that fee, the $350, and we should know if there is an issue with the application beforehand so that it could be rectified. Additionally, at some point, if we are picked, we do have to come up with performance assurance payments, which is a significant amount of money. And when you get to that point and you're ready to submit, and we put a customer into the program and the window closes and we find out it's oversubscribed, the solar developers and customers have spent a significant amount of time and resources to get to that point. And if at the end result is when the 2-week window closes and then the bids are gone through, we find out we weren't picked and we have to wait potentially another 6 months to see if we get picked again. And we've heard instances where customers have put their name in 3 times and they weren't picked. It is frustrating. And there is a lot of time and resources lost. I think also, the fact that it was mentioned by Brian as well, that the small category is probably the best category in this competitive landscape to have projects move forward. They have less interconnection issues. They are easier to build. And again, we're mainly talking about rooftop projects, which are true distributed energy resources for the utility and the consumers and the state. So I think, from the point, and I'll make a recommendation, how we get to putting more money into the small category needs to be decided. But what I would say is, starting in year 4, every application that gets submitted into the small program gets awarded in the 2-week window. When the 2-week window closes, if the money, if you're in, you're automatically in. And if it's oversubscribed for the dollar amount or the megawatt amount, pull forward year 6 money. Okay. And start working on a program, because year 6 is going to come very quickly. It's only 2 more years away. We might as well start thinking about that now as well, but start pulling that money forward and using that money to fund the projects in year 4 and year 5. It is to the benefit of the state, to the stakeholders, all of the stakeholders, and again, the business owners and commercial property owners in the state who want to be involved and have solar implemented at their properties. I'll leave my comments there. And again, I want to thank everyone for listening and participating today.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Any other stakeholder with questions or comments on the incremental capacity question? Attorney Wheel.
Thank you, Chairman. Just 2 questions, I think. Can either company, if the questions, if the answers are different, is the smaller or larger category which kinds of cost recovery from ratepayers?
So just in terms of price caps, the small category is, the highest priced. It's an open access at, $199 and change per megawatt hour for the buy all price cap. And then if netting projects are accepted, their credit is going to be based on the netting rate and any applicable rec price. So just based on that, I understand that there is a concern about the cost of the small category. But it's also worth, being mindful of other impacts. Again, we talked about often the differences in need for system upgrades for a large standalone project versus, a 100 kW rooftop project. So, we can say that when you just look at the price caps, we understand there is, a cost concern. But even though we can't necessarily quantify the broader impacts, it's important to be mindful that there are other factors that may ultimately have an impact in cost as well.
Thanks. And are the netting and the buy all ultimate costs recovered through the NCQF for Eversource, the non-contract qualifying facilities within the NBFMCC? Do you know?
Yeah, so any value that's provided as a bill credit is classified as non-contract QF compensation. And then any cash compensation, of course, a buy-all project could elect to have 100% cash compensation, and then a netting project could have cash compensation through RECs. Those are reflected as within kind of the NRES program costs within annual filings.
Okay. And for UI, what do you know the line item in the NBFMCC that the netting and buy all is booked to?
Yep. As we didn't report any expenses for 2023 in the last exhibit because we didn't have the units in service, we're working on how that exhibit will show this year as we are making payments. But I anticipate it'll be like the way we do it for the RES program. It'll be similar in terms of we'll have likely a NRES netting cost and an NRES buyout cost separated on the exhibit.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Those were all our questions.
Thank you. Anyone else on this topic? All right. If not, let's move to another legislative change topic, but this time the school solar program. I'm going to start with authority staff questions on this, if any, and then I know Attorney Sharkey has some questions or comments on this topic. So, Mr. Kavanaugh, any questions on this topic?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thanks everyone for joining and EDCs for putting the slides together. Appreciate it. So on this slide, do the EDCs have an opinion on whether a school solar project should be restricted into submitting into the school solar category, or whether they should be allowed to submit into the existing small, medium, large, and well, low emissions are relevant, small, medium, and large categories? So separate school category or into existing categories?
So are you asking whether or not they should be able to submit in both, or have to pick one or the other?
Really anything. Well, yeah, I mean, any permutation, do you see merits to one over the other?
Yeah, I'm not sure that there should be any restriction as to where they should apply. But I think that they should have it to at least pick, if there is going to be a separate carve out for the school sector. I don't think they should be able to apply for that and then go ahead and apply for one of the other categories.
And not to kind of lead you on this, but would you foresee that, let's say we open or even prefer that school solar bid into the existing small, medium, large? Do you have an opinion on whether they might be crowded out by the non-school projects? And so no school projects get selected as a result?
I'm not sure that we can answer that really. That comes down to a financial question and kind of what bid prices would be, but I guess it would certainly be possible. It's hard for us to say without seeing some previous numbers to kind of see what school solar projects we're bidding at and price points and things. So it's a bit difficult to answer that one.
Okay, thanks.
This is Christy Prescott. I apologize, I didn't introduce myself earlier. So for the court reporter, I just wanted to pause for a moment, and I can just provide a little bit of thoughts for UI as well. You can note that we've gone through this and we've thought about it, and you can note that we specifically stated on this slide that we'd seek additional comment on this very question. Really, it would be a good one to discuss with the industry, who has been working closely with school. And we're also thinking about school scheduling, recognizing the unique nature of sometimes the school's budgets and the approval process. The timing can be challenging. And so we really wanted to state that we think it's a good idea to not have a separate school program, just from an administrative perspective. Confusion, as Aaron has already stated, and John has stated in the industry, by running different procurements and having the rules be different for schools versus other projects. But we are very open and would love to have that discussion about, what would be the potential pros and downsides of either option.
Thank you, appreciate it. So one more question on this topic. Do the EDCs have an opinion on whether to mandate a floor or ceiling on the storage component of a 25 megawatt carve-out cap?
I wouldn't necessarily have a strongly researched opinion. So my initial suggestion would to be expressed reluctance in introducing any kind of new requirements without really understanding what the impact of those might be. I think if you ask the industry, they might have kind of more perspective on what happens to a project when you're required to add storage to it.
Mm-hmm.
I doubt it gets easier. And I don't know how much more complicated that project gets to develop.
To expand on that a bit, do you think it would be advantageous to, for example, say that of this 25 megawatt cap for solar and storage, we are reserving 5 megawatts just for storage, for example?
So it would be the suggestion would be 5 megawatts of, because I think the 25 megawatts in my mind still refers to the generation capacity. So you're reserving 5 megawatts of generation capacity that's paired with storage.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, you could have, so most likely yes, but you could envision a situation where for a variety of reasons, the school says, I want this backup capacity. And so they're going to have storage on its own, for example. But yes, most likely school plus storage, but potentially storage on its own. But in general, to just, encourage by having this sort of carve out within the carve out of X megawatts of storage to encourage that, the bidding of storage projects, whether they be standalone or with solar.
Again, I mean, it could certainly be done and implemented. I would just say that without much more analysis and making that change and making that reservation, it would be effectively an experiment. That you'd want to closely assess the impacts of and be prepared to adjust.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you. That's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Arpin, any questions on this topic?
Yes, I just have one question on this topic. So my question, do the EDCs have any insights into the overall interest in school solar deployment across Connecticut through the NRES program to date?
I would say we have nothing specific. We could go back and take a look at previous results and kind of see if there was, schools bid in maybe to the SAM category, but we haven't done any sort of analysis on that level.
Does UI have anything that they would like to add to that topic?
Yeah, we'd have to take some time to go through our results from previous RFPs to see what the interest has been.
Yeah, we'll just note that in our applications, it's not always clear that it's a school, or any particular business, and so that we don't quite have that information at our fingertips. So to get that information, it would just require. It's not that we just can't just quickly get you an answer. It's you, in fact, would have to go through each customer account number and then determine whether or not it appears and maybe match it with addresses and things and see if it appears to be a school or associated with the school.
Thank you for that response. And those are all my questions on this topic. So I turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Charles, anything on this topic?
Yeah, just one additional question. So if school solar was to be a separate category within the NRES program, do the EDCs have an opinion on whether that should be a competitive selection or have an administratively set compensation rate the way the small category does now?
I think perhaps the EDCs don't have an exact opinion, or at least I don't, speaking for UI. I would say that I know that, in fact, in the years of the LREC-ZREC program, we have had many schools participate and bid in throughout those times. And it may be a good question for developers, because I would say that in many cases, the application was on behalf of a school, but the application was submitted by the developer, and perhaps whatever that financial situation was, they were able to participate in a competitive procurement previously, and perhaps the developers can weigh in on whether or not there are unique circumstances associated with bids associated with schools that would be different than what we've seen in LREC-ZREC or NRES to date, which I just don't know if anybody have been selected, but I do know that they have been selected in LREC-ZREC.
Thank you. I appreciate that response. And that is my only question on that topic.
Thank you. Then I'm going to turn the floor to Attorney Sharkey, and then any other stakeholder with questions or comments on this specific subtopic, if you could go ahead and get into the queue using the raise hand function. So let me find Attorney Sharkey. See him on. Mr. Sharkey, I think you had a separate presentation on this topic. Were you prepared to give it now, or did you want us to come back? Okay, we'll come back to him. In the meantime, are there any other stakeholders with questions or comments on the school solar legislative change? Okay. Okay. Mr. Ford.
I would just say that I would fully support this carve out. I think it would be beneficial to have a separate category for schools versus a commercial industrial business. So a carve would be a positive for the program. And
Mr. Ford, I think you may be having connectivity challenges.
program and not being taken from any of these other the existing categories that are there today. So thank you very much. And if I could just clarify one of my earlier comments, I spoke about the performance assurance payment, and I may have not recalling exactly what I said, but I just want to clarify for the record that again, when we do submit to the program, we have to pay. We have $350 at the same time. That money is allocated by developers.
Okay, I'm so sorry, Mr. Ford, I'm having a really hard time hearing you. So let's come back to you in just a moment. I'm not sure we caught all of that comment.
Which do you want me to read? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Which comment did you want me to repeat?
We didn't hear the clarification of your $350 performance assurance.
My apologies. Yes, what I was stating was in my earlier comments for clarification, I may have stated that the performance assurance payment was put up after we are picked. And if we are picked, I may have misspoke if I did say that. I would just want to clarify that when the developer submits a project into the program, we are submitting the $350 application fee and the performance assurance payment at that time. If we are not picked, we're obviously getting that money back, but it's still funds being allocated upfront to the program. And I may have misspoke earlier, so I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Hinsky.
Yes, good morning. Thanks. Jeff Hinsky from Green Skies Clean Energy. We're a North Haven-based CNI solar developer, and we do quite a number of school projects in Connecticut over the years. Just want to make sure, not make sure, when in any final proposed rule changes or additions for the school carve out, I think it's important that it's made clear that the school or the Board of Education anyway of the particular township benefits from that project. There are certainly, as currently written, there are projects that are, configured at a school site or additional solar added to a school site under a buyout program. And the school maybe gets a lease payment, but they aren't directly benefiting from the solar necessarily, other than financially. So I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing, but I think there should be something to pretty clearly define that the school or the Board of Education anyway has direct benefit from any projects that are in that carve out.
Mr. Hensky, can I push you on that comment at all and say you thought through, do you have any suggestions on how we go about calculating or verifying the benefits the school is receiving from projects?
Yeah. Well, obviously under a netting configuration, it's pretty straightforward in the sense that, they will have the direct benefits on their utility bills. Under a buy-all configuration, I guess I don't know if you would put a minimum financial benefit, or maybe a certain percentage of the buy-all credits need to be going to district beneficial accounts. I haven't given the deep thought in that sense, but obviously, maybe not obviously, but I think the intent of the legislation is that the school districts themselves are the ones receiving benefits, and that's why there's the special carve out. So, I think some thought needs to be put in there about how that can be verified or confirmed, exactly what the numbers would look like, and is it a minimum? Is it some percentage? I don't know. I mean, haven't given that any deep thought, but I think it's something that would be important to specify.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the comment. Anyone else with questions or comments on this topic of the school solar legislative change? Okay. Very good. We're going to move to the next topic of recommended programmatic changes. So we'll go in the same order. Mr. Kavanaugh, questions for the EDCs on this?
Thank you, Chair. Just one. Can the EDCs please elaborate on their selection process for small category projects? Specifically, are the EDCs, and I think I know the answer, but are the EDCs reviewing every single bid that comes in? And if so, why? Do the benefits of doing so outweigh the administrative costs? And as an aside, I want to acknowledge the point that the EDCs made earlier during this discussion about how reviewing every bid does preempt a project from submitting multiple times, only to ultimately find out once it is reviewed that there's a fundamental issue with the project. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think you answered part of your own question.
Yep.
We sort of owe it to the bidder that, to identify any deficiencies within the bid, because they did pay the non-refundable bid fee, but also bids do interact with one another. There's limitations on number of bids that can be submitted at a single parcel or site address. There's also, capacity limitations from that perspective. And at least from an EDC perspective, it makes sense to review all the bids in the aggregate and kind of compare them against each other for efficiency's sake. And while I have the mic, I just would like to point out something that we didn't mention on the programmatic changes in the small category slide, but we did see some comments submitted about the proposed schedule for the RFP next year. The comments were on a schedule that we did not submit. So in the event that does come up, the schedule that we submitted was very similar to the year 3 schedule and not the year 2 schedule, which it appears was commented on. I just wanted to point out that point of clarification. And I hope I answered the other part of the question.
I appreciate that. And just a quick follow-up on that. Not to not to put you on the spot, so we can revisit this later, but do you think, are there opportunities to, I want to recognize that reviewing all of the bids it's an intensive exercise. Are there any low-hanging fruit in terms of how to make that process a lighter lift for the EDCs?
I mean, certainly open to any suggestions.
We'll revisit.
We've discussed it every year to try to,
Sure.
try to revisit this every year and see if we can find some benefits to evaluating the smalls kind of before we do everything else. I mean, we do take steps to, quote unquote, pick the low-hanging fruit, like you said, by evaluating some of the items that can be done ahead of time. But again, just given efficiencies in the way we run queries and things and kind of how bids are compared to other bids, we end up at the same conclusion that it makes the most sense for us to kind of review everything on the aggregate.
Appreciate that. That's all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Arpin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my first question, Mr. Bumpin, could you please turn to slide 3? So my first question, could the EDCs please elaborate on how the revised or new definitions for new construction and by-all production meter would impact the objectives and eligibility of the NRES program?
I mean, I think ultimately it makes it a little bit less complicated, but I don't think it really impacts the objectives in a negative fashion. The goal there was to just clarify what the different scenarios are, mainly with the new construction designation for the by-all projects, and that by-all projects are not inherently new construction just because they require a new service, and that the sort of antiquated definition of new construction from LREC ZREC really didn't fit, especially with the integration of rooftop by-alls and no load being served. So I think that was our main goal, but I don't think we believe that there's any real negative impact, and maybe it sort of opens the door and make things more clear for program participants.
Thank you for that response. So the follow-up, would the eligibility of the NRES program be restricted in any way from these new or revised definitions?
Nope, not at all. It's really just a point of clarification, and then sort of follow through on the construction side of things and how things are set up within billing systems is really all that would be impacted.
Thank you for that response. So my next question, how do the EDCs define the term parcel under the one bid per parcel rule for by-all bids? And I recognize that there is some confusion over the parcel definition in the SCEF docket, so that was part of the reason why I'm bringing this up now.
So I think we define it as legal parcel.
Could the EDCs elaborate a little more on that? On what is meant specifically by legal parcel?
I'll jump in and maybe suggest one thing, and then the team can either correct me or elaborate. I mean, I think frequently, in trying to administer the program rules efficiently, we'll often rely on parcels recorded with local municipality, assessor's office or other property records.
Thank you. Does UI have anything that they would like to add on that topic?
I was just pausing because I was just trying to pull up some of the program rules that I was just pulling up, and I think the answer is it's we go by how things are defined in the RFP and in the program rules specifically, and I think parcel as defined by a municipality is a good process to follow in terms of we think that that's standard practice.
It's also an independent resource that the EDCs can rely on in trying to administer the RFP. Again, just to maybe get ahead of some additional discussions. So, I mean, parcel parcel requirements have been, or generation site requirements have been a common feature of renewable programs, both in Connecticut and elsewhere. And there's reasons for that. I think people who have been involved with these programs are aware of, past scenarios that of projects being split in ways that, when revealed, were plainly, not consistent with the objectives. So that's why we have parcel or generation site restrictions. And it's tough because the EDCs then are placed in a position of having to enforce those, which can be challenging to do objectively. So I think that's what we're trying to do is, continue to learn from experience and propose rule changes that, continue to mitigate against the outcomes that have been seen previously that everyone agrees should be prevented, but do so in a way that doesn't impair the speedy and efficient administration of solicitations by the EDCs. So there's a balance to be struck.
0906.
I appreciate that response. So would the EDCs support the addition of a explicit parcel definition in the NRES program documents? Because I believe, if memory serves me correct, that the program documents do not have an explicit parcel definition currently.
Yes, I think we certainly would.
Thank you. So my next question, Mr. Bumpin, could you please turn to slide 7? So I think the EDCs touched on this a little, but I just wanted to more explicitly flesh this out. What additional measures would the EDCs support to enhance customer participation in the small category?
Unfortunately, I don't think the EDCs have the silver bullet answer to this. Frank, I think there are a lot of different approaches that could be taken. Apologies for forgetting the gentleman's name, but the representative from Select obviously had an idea. Other stakeholders may have ideas. I think we've made the changes that we could readily make, kind of the no regrets changes to improve the experience. Reinstating the 2-week window was one. But I mean, like, the simplest thing you could do is just give priority to small projects and, effectively, allow any small project that applied an award. And then, award any remaining capacity to the other categories. Obviously, there would be impacts of that in terms of the overall cost of the program that Pura or other stakeholders may be concerned with. So it's tough because I think absent legislative changes, you're bound by the changes that can be implemented.
Thank you for that response. Does UI have anything that they would like to add on that topic?
I apologize. Was your question, what could we do to improve the customer experience, or to apologize?
The customer experience in the small category.
I at first thought it was, how can we get more customers to apply to the small category? And I was going to say, well, we already have a lot of customers that are applying to the small category. So I will pull back. And I will say that, it really is a balance. As we know, the small category is administratively set, is our higher priced category for programs. But we have high demand. If it depends, I guess, what the goal that the authority wants to perhaps see achieved. If we're balancing affordability, perhaps the small category is not the best place to put the dollars. But if we're trying to balance, customer access and satisfaction, it may be. And so again, those are challenges. As one of the topics that's being discussed in the PBR docket, and one of the items is contract attrition and for project attrition, as we've mentioned, historically, the smaller categories are seeing a higher percentage of going in service than the other categories by the numbers. And so I guess it would say, I'm not quite answering your question, but it's because we could do a number of things depending on which goal and policy we're trying to achieve.
I appreciate that response. So now my final question, and this last question is directed specifically to Eversource. So in their second written comment response, ConSSA claimed that Eversource imposed interconnection cost changes after the execution and full payment of the interconnection agreement. Could Eversource please provide further clarification on this issue, specifically addressing why cost changes were implemented after the interconnection agreement was finalized and fully paid?
Yes, but I'm going to ask that the subject matter experts more closely involved with interconnection answer that question. I believe on the call we have David Ferrante from Eversource, as well as Karl Nowashevsky. So I think one of them is best prepared to answer the question.
Do those folks have the ability to take themselves off of mute? I'm not sure if they do.
Yes, they should be able to. If you want to say their names one more time, I can ask them to unmute too. With the button.
Yeah, or perhaps maybe I don't know if we can. They might be having technical difficulties, but again, the expectation was David Ferrante or Karl Nowashevsky are most directly involved in the interconnection process.
Okay, well, let's give them a second, and if not, maybe we can circle back to the topic during the interconnection section too.
Yep. We do apologize, and I don't want to delay the technical meeting. So we'll offline make sure we identify any technical difficulties those individuals are having, to make sure that they can participate when this topic is revisited.
Sure, not a problem. All right, Mr. Arpin, do you want to continue with your questions?
Those are all my questions. So I would like to thank the EDCs again, and then turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Charles, questions on the programmatic changes?
Thank you. Yeah, just a couple questions on this slide. So the EDCs mentioned earlier that projects will often apply multiple times if they're not selected in the first solicitation. Do the EDCs then review that project's application each time, or is there a way to track whether that's already been done and expedite the review for the next solicitation that the project applies to?
We do review it each time. There are changing rules and caps and things within the NRES program. Things have changed year over year where it's necessary to kind of review the bid. And it isn't always a guarantee that the bid is submitted the same exact way by the developer. So we feel it's necessary to review it again.
Thank you. Is that the same for both EDCs?
Yes, that's the same for United Illuminating as well.
Understood. Thank you. And then on the 2-week window, I was just wondering if the EDCs could elaborate on what share of small zero emission projects are submitted during that 2-week window versus later. So are there a lot of projects that keep submitting out even after the 2-week window is closed, if the category is already oversubscribed, or has it happened that most projects do submit during those 2 weeks?
Yeah, the vast majority of the projects submit within the first 2 weeks. There are some outliers that submit after the fact, and we do try to make it known after the 2-week window what kind of level of subscription we're at. But yeah, the vast majority do submit. I would say, upper 90s in the percentile submit within that first 2 weeks.
Okay, I appreciate that response. That's all for me. Thank you, Chair. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I missed that. Was that
I
the
said
same for
no,
both?
that's for Eversource. I don't want to speak for UI, but my assumption is it's probably pretty much the same.
Does UI have anything to add there?
Yeah, it's the same. We pretty much get oversubscribed within the first 2 weeks, then we don't see we see minimal bids after the 2-week window for the small zero emission category.
Thank you. I'll turn it back to you, Chair.
And just another point on that, we also do send out an email at the close of the 2-week window and to let people know that that is closed and that we're seeing high demand, and whether or not we believe it'll be triggering a random selection right away, so that people can have that information as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Trahan, I'd seen your hand up. If there are any stakeholders with questions or comments on the topic of programmatic changes.
Yes, Chairman, on the issue of how to get more, or how to improve the experience for small NRES customers, the solution is pretty simple: lift the cap. On small projects, I know that that's not within the jurisdiction of PURA, but I know that there are legislators and leadership on the House side in the legislature that would like to see that cap lifted, but and they could use all the encouragement they could get from the authority to do that. So I know it didn't happen last session, but perhaps we can lift the cap, even if it were for a temporary period, just to see what the impact would be on ratepayers going forward. On the issue of interconnection, I could address Mr. Alpin's question, or I can wait for the interconnection side if you'd like.
And
Let's, oh,
yeah,
Mr.
let me jump in. I've confirmed that David Ferrante from Eversource is now available.
Okay, excellent. I think we're almost to the dedicated topic of interconnection. So let's circle back there. Thank you both. And then Attorney Malone.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to make two brief comments on the new construction project definition change, and then, of course, what's become a favorite of mine, the parcel rule. On the new construction project definition, I read it over and over again, and to me, it doesn't seem to make anything clearer than the prior rule. And if Eversource is saying it shouldn't change anything, I don't know why it should be changed. And Aaron just said before, it makes it a little bit more complicated. So I don't know why the rule that's not going to change anything should be rewritten to make it more complicated. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Then on the legal parcel rule, it's surprising after the ongoing dispute that I have with Eversource over the definition of parcel that they don't put in an actual definition in this program manual going forward. And I don't think they've ever provided a good reason as to why you can only have one bid per parcel. I mean, if people are trying to avoid being in a higher category, I understand that. But if you have, I mean, historically, this program is a successor to the LREC ZREC. In that prior program, you had to either have a 1 megawatt size project or a 2 megawatt. So the interconnection applications that would have been submitted, 6 or 8 years ago, in our case, have that size. So, but now you can have a project up to 5 megawatts. So you could easily have two 2 megawatt projects on a single municipal tax assessor parcel that aren't trying to get any price advantage in a category, aren't two separate generation sites, at least the way the Siting Council looks at it and DEEP looks at it. So I don't see what the purpose is of their single bid per municipal parcel rule. And I don't think they've ever justified the policy behind it. But I don't understand why they don't have a specific definition of parcels here if they're trying to justify this is serving some purpose. And I also don't understand and I'd like to hear if the EDCs have a response as to historically they've administered this parcel rule by interchangeably defining it as a generation site. In their mind, generation site is a parcel. But in DEEP's view and in the Connecticut Siting Council view, generation site means the generation site where the generator is and its associated equipment, not the whole legal parcel. So this is a complicated program enough, but I'd ask the EDCs as to what's the policy reason for coming up with this parcel rule that's still very vague here because it's not defined.
I'll go ahead and start, and the rest of the team may have additional thoughts. I mean, again, we don't relish having to be responsible for, administering parcel rules, but there are reasons that they exist. There have been examples of abuse in the past, and so our goal is to make it as simple as possible, and make the program as accessible as possible. If there would be benefit in having a definition of parcel, we certainly wouldn't object to that. We'll say historically, our experience has been that most participants, understood what parcel meant, understood what generation site meant, and we could administer the program accordingly. But recent experience has demonstrated that that's not universal. That there are people that read it differently and want to apply a different definition. And we've worked through that, and we appreciate that we've been able to rely on the ombudsperson in this cycle to help provide clarification and provide an independent perspective. So that's where we've landed. And again, we're not opposed to adding another definition if there was agreement that would be helpful. We're also mindful that the NRES program rules are very complicated. They're carryovers from LREC, ZREC programs. So they're really documents that have evolved for over a decade now. And I would exercise caution in, the urge to just add more language or adjust language with each cycle in response to unique issues that come up. Because what has happened over time is it just makes the program documentation more complicated, more detailed, and less accessible. We don't think it's in the interest of the program objective if, like, to be only slightly hyperbolic, you have to have a law degree to put together a bid and understand the program. So I think we're trying to balance objectives as best as possible, and that's where our recommendation comes in. But we're of course receptive to implementing any changes that PURA determines would be constructive to program objectives.
I mean, my only comment on that response from Brian is that he still has not stated what the policy objective is here of this single parcel rule, because they've created a different rule for generation site than the Siting Council uses and the DEEP uses.
The policy objective is to have a easily understandable and easily administrable requirement for project division to address project division issues that have come up in the past and make it easy to understand. And again, I mean, the other thing I'll add is, I mean, there's also no prohibition on submitting a 4 megawatt bid instead of 2 megawatt bids. I understand that there may be a desire to, be able to utilize interconnection work and agreements that was completed for prior LREC ZREC agreements. I'd be a little bit concerned about accommodating projects that were previously awarded agreements and ultimately, weren't able to fulfill those agreements.
All right. Well, I'm not going to continue the debate if anyone's interested, they could read our filings in the SCIF docket. We'll talk about it again there. Clearly, it's not clear. Even the ombudsperson said it's not clear. And I guess I'll leave it at that for here.
All right, thank you. Mr. Ford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Two follow-ups. One, I would like to support Mr. Trahan's easy and logical path to success for the small category next year, which is lifting the caps. Secondly, I just want to push back a little bit on the notion that the small category is the most expensive. Of course, on paper, when you see the rate that category gets for a buy-all project, of course, it looks expensive. But in the grand scheme of things, it's probably not the most expensive because of the efficiency that we touched upon earlier for these type of projects and how they do get built quickly and without upgrades to utility infrastructure and things of that nature. So, and to further that a little bit more, look, we have seen over the course of the LREC-ZREC program and this program now for 3 years, those prices coming down that are paid out to these projects through REC payments or other payment awards. There is a point of, the leveling off, and similar to the utilities on a annual or biannual or every 3 years or whatever it is that they ask for their rate increases from ratepayers because their costs are going up to maintain infrastructure or labor cost, employee cost, insurance costs for health insurance, vehicle insurance, project insurance, equipment, product, you name it, those costs are not going down. And the same applies to the solar industry today. Costs have leveled off. But what is going up is, again, in some cases, permitting fees. Labor costs are certainly going up, right? Employees want raises. They want to see promotions. They have health insurance. Costs are going up. Everybody knows inflation has been running rampant. So there is a point where, the continued pressure on pricing for solar projects going down can't just be that our pricing is going down for what we're providing power to the utility grid versus the utilities rates continually and constantly going up. So thank you for the opportunity to speak again.
All right, thank you. Others with questions or comments on this topic? If I just ask a question myself of the UI and Eversource teams, just focused on the small category and what's actually within Pura's realm of control currently. My recollection of when the program was designed is that we opted against an auction for the small category, thinking that it might be overly burdensome to those customers. And maybe my question isn't a suggestion for NRES, but perhaps more ripe for a discussion in the successor program study. But have the EDCs developed any thoughts or opinions on whether implementing an auction for the small category is practical or would be effective if we were going to consider a different megawatt allocation between the categories, in terms of one way of looking at controlling costs? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I appreciate the interest in introducing a fair mechanism to kind of select winners and losers as opposed to the effective lottery that we have now. My initial reaction, I'd be concerned about whether that would really support the customer experience. Again, I think we're mindful that these projects are serving small businesses, they're serving small, our institutions, universities, schools. And it's already challenging enough to be in a lottery, but to then tell these customers that in order for you to have this choice, you also need to be subject to this competitive element, might be counterproductive, and it would erode the customer experience, discourage those customers from pursuing those options. I would suggest that if there was cost concerns, maybe considering being more aggressive with the price cap might be a better way to approach it. Again, that's not dissimilar to how the NRES program is being managed. It's an open enrollment program, but the compensation available through it is subject to adjustment every year, and that's the mechanism by which costs are controlled.
Thank you. UI, any different or additional comments?
I support what Mr. Rice has offered, and I would say practically, we can certainly do an auction for a small category. Administratively doing it is likely, very clear. The one thing is, though, if we still continue to get so much interest, we'll have a lot of applications that will continue to apply. Whereas right now, at least, we're given the signal after the 2-week window whether or not we're subscribed or not. So you may end up in a situation with, if you didn't adjust the caps, you have a lot of interest. You'd have a lot of applications, perhaps even more than you would at the deadline than now. So I would just say that we certainly can do it, and it's not impractical to do so. And then once you were to make that choice, you'd have to think about, what are you sacrificing by introducing that? To Mr. Bryce's point of, the customer experience is perhaps, one of those metrics that you want to think about the impact.
Thank you. So on the price cap suggestion, Mr. Rice, I appreciate that. Before I go down that rabbit hole for a second, are there any other ideas that come to mind for either EDC about other types of mechanisms? Like, I think what I'm thinking through is just hypothetically, if the authority were to either take up in the remainder of NRES or in the successor study where we could explore a topic further. But hypothetically, if we were going to take up any of the suggestions or explore others, that would improve the experience of customers in the small category. If we were to address what I'm hearing as a concern in comments from like the OCC and DEEP, if I was reading their comments correctly, concerns about costs, then are there any other mechanisms to address the cost issue? Or are we thinking like the auction that I asked and the administrative price cap, getting more tight with that Mr. Rice raised? Anything else to put on the table right now, or I think it's just like those kind of two options?
I guess I'll make another pitch, and I think we've talked about this in the past, where we have proposed kind of fast tracking projects that are a little bit more ahead of others. Perhaps if a project has already submitted an interconnection application, maybe perhaps that may be beneficial to small projects, which would advance both the likelihood of it going in service as well as having a more kind of color and knowledge for the bidders to understand exactly where the cost would be. If it were cost competitive, it may support that sort of reduction in cost. If you were to introduce competitive in the small, but also provide some sort of benefit for those that are in already submitted the interconnection application, that might also help with reduced costs.
Ms. Prescott, how would you characterize the level of disruptiveness, if that's the word, of that suggestion? Like, I'm haven't scripted
Yeah.
these questions, so I'm just trying to, in my mind, reconcile like this thread with whether I should be appropriately putting it into the bucket of potential NRES solutions or modifications, or if I should be earmarking this for our successor study docket. Would introducing the suggestion that you just laid out be disruptive, overly disruptive to the NRES program, either from an EDC perspective of administrative changes or some other mechanism? Like, which category would you put that suggestion in? NRES modification or something to study for a successor program?
I appreciate your question. I threw it out at your prompt, and now I have to think about what my answer might be. So let me think through that for a moment. I think we have the benefit of having some of the interconnection folks on the call. And so I am not our interconnection subject matter expert, but I will say that typically for our smaller projects using the hosting capacity maps, as well as the small interconnection project application process, I believe the timelines are faster, and also the ability to get interconnected if, using this hosting capacity and all the signs that are provided, may be reasonable without establishing too much disruption in the industry. And so in terms for the development, for the developer side in the application, in terms of the EDCs administering that, could we easily put that into the year 4 program rules? I think so. I think it is it would just be a requirement, and it would be communication into the industry of the one thing I will pause with is if it were something that was included and implemented into year 4, or perhaps waited for year 5, is that developers would certainly need to know that this was coming. If it were to be a requirement, maybe perhaps for year 4, we would think about maybe putting it in place in August instead of February, since your final decisions might not come until, let's just say, November or something of 25. It might be too soon to expect a small project to have interconnection application already available if they want any sort of preference for a year 4 January. But these are just my initial thoughts.
Just to probe at that just a little bit more, what would you think, think in terms of how much stakeholder feedback, either formally or informally, has occurred on this idea? I know that you've raised it before. I want to say I remember it being an idea in the CAP discussion at the legislature in the spring. I'm not sure that we've pursued it heavily through our dockets thus far. So any formal or informal feedback that you've heard from stakeholders that you could share? Is this something that needs a lot more exploration through our process in your mind?
I think that it's a standard practice in Massachusetts. And so a lot of the developers that are participating in the Connecticut programs also participate in Massachusetts. And so I don't think it'd be a super unusual process for many developers who are in both states. And we have heard both sides of things, and it's why I'm couching it a bit, which is some developers certainly are saying to us, we're ready to go. We've looked at everything. We don't think that the interconnection will be complicated. We've reached out, we've talked to the interconnection groups. We want to get this project in, and we want to get it in service. And then on the flip side, we've also heard, you're introducing another level of complexity, and it's another cost, and you can't guarantee I'm going to get selected. So therefore, I don't want to pay this fee, which is why I was just saying that you could make that a requirement, perhaps, but perhaps you'd have a special carve out or something, or maybe a fast track or a bump ahead if you had that information, which is kind of a bid preference, if you will.
Yeah, I know. I'll just jump in and offer some additional perspective, because I know we've talked about interconnection milestones, and I think they provide value and are important for different reasons in different segments. If we're just sticking with the small category, again, we've said interconnection typically, not always, isn't as much of an ultimate barrier to project completion, but there are no universal truths on that point. But I will say my understanding is ultimately what the solar industry wants is to understand what the path forward is. So I think if you had a scenario in which interconnection applications and even agreements were a requirement for small category eligibility, but there were other changes made that provide high confidence that once that requirement was met, there would be a place in the small category for a project. That would be workable, and I think that would also have certain advantages. One of the reasons that we've proposed the updated definitions to new construction project is because of kind of confusion that subsequently emerged for some projects in navigating the interconnection process. So to the extent that we can have a clean pathway on kind of technical interconnection requirements and then commercial program requirements, that those kind of parallel paths can move together and be consistent. I think that would provide the added benefit of streamlining the process. That there definitely are some inefficiencies in having a commercial application to the NRES program separate from a technical interconnection application, because it creates opportunities for inconsistencies and points that need to be clarified. Again, referring back to the RES program example, we have the opportunity to merge those processes. And in my opinion, that's resulted in a much more streamlined process for projects.
Mr. Rice, can you clarify for me, merge the processes? Are you referring to the interconnection milestones and
yeah, so like I'm saying if we were only accepting bids for small projects that already had interconnection agreements or had applied for interconnection, then we could immediately link kind of those two paths. Yeah, we try to do it as quickly as possible in the current process. We ask developers to tell us what the interconnection application associated with this NRES project is. Or if you don't have it at the time you bid, let us know when you do. But it's not 100% to match those up. And even when we do kind of match up the IDs, they're two separate applications. So to the extent that you can keep projects on kind of a single path and addressing the various requirements in a more integrated way, I think there would be benefits there in terms of streamlining.
Thank you. And I can't remember the overlap between your all's teams and this Energy Storage Solutions program teams. Does anyone, it's my recollection that we actually do require the projects to apply for interconnection at the time they apply for the storage incentives. So it sounds like, assuming I'm correct, that that suggestion aligns with other grid mod programs. Know if anyone's actually capable of affirming my understanding right now, but we can take that subject to check.
Can't entirely affirm, but it's a good suggestion. And again, it's tough to say what like at the same time means. Again, with RES, we really have the best scenario because they literally accomplish both with the same application.
Is that how it is in Massachusetts?
No, it's not. In Massachusetts, they are presently separate applications, but for all but the smallest projects, projects have to have a executed interconnection agreement before applying to the SMART program in Massachusetts.
Is the small category, when you say all but the smallest projects, is the definition aligned with ours, or is it even smaller?
It's aligned, less than 25 kW. I believe there are also exemptions for municipal projects, but
got it. Thank you. I want to come back to Mr. Rice here, the administrative price, but it seems like I've prompted a lot of feedback. Mr. Verkler's hand was up first, but I think Ms. Pine probably can clarify my energy storage statement. So maybe I can go Ms. Pine and then Mr. Verkler, please.
Thank you. Yes, it is a requirement in the Energy Storage Solutions program to submit for your interconnection prior to applying to energy storage solutions.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Mr. Verkler. Sorry, Mr. Verkler, I just want to make sure you're coming off mute.
That work? Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. You think 4 years into this, I'd have it all figured out, right? Just dating back to the last conversation when you're talking just briefly about auctions, I just want to make a quick comment and not derail what you're talking about here. But just a quick point of where I'm looking at it. When we saw the data a few weeks or months ago from Aaron on which projects were awarded bids in the mediums and larges, the only ones that were being awarded projects were in the EJCs because of the adder. And so my fear is that if the small went into the auction route, that the same thing would happen, and so that large swaths of the state would not be able to win the auctions.
Got it. Thank you. Mr. Hinsky?
Yes, Jeff Hinsky from Green Skies again. Just add a comment about the discussions related to interconnection or having to have interconnection agreements. Different states have obviously different rules. And certainly there is a potential impact of getting a flood of interconnection applications or requests for projects that aren't very mature otherwise, or aren't likely to head or go forward. And so you end up with the backlog on the EDC side and reviewing the interconnections and having a big backlog of interconnection requests versus the backlog on the project submitting into a program. So it's a fine balance. I don't know which is a better, neither are better, but if which is how do you weigh these versus each other's? I mean, certainly we have experience in other states where you'll have 20 projects submitted for interconnection in a given substation or something like that, and it's very clear that many of those projects won't move forward, or the time to study it becomes prohibitive. So it's something to consider if we really want to look at adding those kind of maturity requirements to projects, and because the hurdle to submit for interconnection isn't that great, isn't that high. So the burden to do that and put in a bunch of interconnection requests for projects that are speculative is not necessarily too difficult. So
Mr. Hinsky, thank you. That feels like the other side of the coin. Maybe I can put that back to Ms. Prescott and Mr. Rice. And now we're kind of in the interconnection space, recognizing that both your teams are on. But it feels like there might be a flip side of the coin to clogging up the interconnection queue with this idea. Again, I know we're kind of off script here, but anyone from the EDC side want to weigh in on that flip side of the coin?
Again, I want to start with prefacing that we're still talking about small category. And Dave Ferrante can chime in. My hope would be that the small projects are not the ones that are going to be clogging up the interconnection queue. These projects can typically be brought online without the need for upgrades. But I don't know. I'd invite.
Brian, it's David. Brian, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
I'm not sure if on video. I'm not used to Zoom too much, but yeah, if the category is 200 kW and below, I would hope that developers were checking hosting capacity and not putting too many speculative projects in. I don't think, as Brian said, the burden would be too high. I'm not sure how UI feels about it, but we always discourage real speculative projects in the interconnection queue, but we understand that that's not always possible. So, if it's limited to 200 below, it's behind customer load, not in a green field somewhere, not on the, if you've done, your due diligence and not place something in a, standalone and where there's no three-phase service, it would be a problem, right? So
I would also expect that if these projects aren't going to move forward, then they would be withdrawn pretty quickly.
Yeah, we would just withdraw them if they didn't move forward. The bigger concern is, the gentleman from Green side says, is sometimes it's difficult if there's deadlines for bidding and submitting stuff. You get a whole flood of interconnections. That is always a problem, and it's hard to manage that workflow sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. That's
It's an up and down kind of thing, Chairwoman. That sometimes is problematic trying to get things done on time. If you get 101 days, that type of thing.
Okay. Yeah, I could see the workflow challenges around the twice a year when you're particularly subject to the small category. If we added that comment or that requirement, let me put a pin in that because I want to talk through interconnection issues more fully. And thank you, Mr. Ferrante. I think that's probably not the last I'm going to call on you. But Mr. Rice, if I could just circle back to the idea you raised a few minutes ago about tinkering with the administrative price cap if we felt like we had to control costs if shifting more megawatts to the small category. As you mentioned, we have like the pretty rigorous rate model in the NRES program, with a lot of inputs and assumptions, difficult to replicate in short order, in my mind, into the NRES program, or at least on the small category side. But I'm not the one that would have to do it. Would this be same question I had for Ms. Prescott, but on the other idea? Is this idea more right for a successor program, or is this something that we could explore in your mind for NRES, either year 4 or pushing to year 5?
I think the answer is you could probably do both. I mean, there are probably adjustments that Pura could make to enable more participation in the current program. Again, you could increase the amount of capacity reserved for the small category while simultaneously lowering the rate cap. And I wouldn't say you necessarily need a rate model to be able to set a rate cap that controls costs. I mean, I think the EDCs have also been forward that we have some concerns that the ability to obtain valid, good assumptions for the rate model is a risk. Another approach that I know has been taken in other jurisdictions is kind of looking at a adjustable kind of block mechanism, saying, if you have an annual target that we think to sustain an orderly market, we really ought to be procuring 20 megawatts a year, and you get 25 megawatts of interest one year, that's fine. You allow those 25 megawatts to enroll, but you take that as a signal that the market is healthy and could absorb rate adjustments, and you reduce it for the following year. There's a risk that you might overshoot, and maybe you only get 15 megawatts the following year due to rate levels and a variety of other impacts. But you have the ability to say, okay, we're not going to change. We're going to keep the program open, and we're not going to make any further reductions. Or you could even take the approach of moving the cap back up. But again, you're not necessarily relying on a model to be your answer. You're really kind of looking at the performance of the market and making adjustments based on that.
Mr. Rice, just so I can fully understand this, does that mean, I can't remember, I apologize if it was you or Ms. Prescott or Mr. King that had the suggestion earlier. Someone mentioned it could have been a stakeholder pulling capacity forward from a future program year. Is that the only way? Is that how you make your suggestion work? Because I wasn't following the 20 to 25.
No, yeah. So that is an issue. Is that right now the total capacity of the NRES program is capped. So you can't you can't award more capacity to the small category without taking that from the medium and large. So that's a current restriction that you operate in, which remains a current restriction. So any changes you make now are going to be bound by that trade-off. Potentially, that could be adjusted based on recommendations from a programmatic review that ultimately resulted in legislative adjustments. But obviously, that the track for making those types of changes are longer. So in the short term, you're bound by constraints and you're making trade-offs.
Right. So the way to effectuate your suggestion within current program constraints is to take care of the awards in the small category first, and then to allocate the remainder to the medium and large.
And I want to say that I'm not saying that's a recommation of Eversource.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I should be more precise in my words.
But I think if it was decided that there was a goal of enabling more participation in the small category in the short term, within legislative constraints, I think that's what the result would be.
All right, fascinating. Thank you. We've hinted a lot of questions around interconnection, but any other questions, comments on the small category programmatic changes before we move on?
Gillette, I apologize if this was already stated, but I just wanted to also mention that I think I've read in some of the comments that there was a statement that the EDCs had not had done away with the 2-week window for the small category for the year 3. And I think Mr. Bauskas kind of commented on that, but maybe not directly. And I just wanted to restate that we certainly do have the 2-week window. It is in place for year 3, and we are currently working our way through that for the August procurement right now. So I just wanted to make that known and restate it again. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone, for entertaining my questions on that topic. Let's move on to the interconnection topic. I believe we're up to, yes, in the interconnection report. So I'm going to go all the way back to questions from my staff before any comments or questions from stakeholders. So Mr. Kavanaugh, any interconnection?
Not this time, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arpin.
Yes, I just had the question I asked before, so I was wondering if the Eversource team could elaborate on that a little more, perhaps Kanasase. And I can repeat the question if that would be helpful. So in their second written comment response, Kanasase claimed that Eversource imposed interconnection cost changes after the execution and full payment of the interconnection agreement. Could Eversource please provide further clarification on this issue, specifically addressing why cost changes were implemented after the interconnection agreement was finalized and fully paid? So I'd like to direct that to Eversource first, and then perhaps Mr. Strahan can give a response to it.
I'm off mute now. Okay. Many of these interconnections that were executed, some were paid, some were not paid. In the 2019, 2020, right prior to and right during COVID. And many of these projects were delayed. The interconnection agreements state, even though they're executed and paid, that if costs have gone up, they haven't been executed or proceeded with construction, that we need to notify developers of these cost increases. And as Mr. Ford from, I think it was one of GRE or another developer, costs have significantly increased from 2019 and 2020 and to today, over 30%. So we notified the developers of the cost increase. The estimates are best effort estimates.
Could you please elaborate on why the interconnection cost estimates increased?
Costs increased from labor, material, supply chain issues from 2019, 20, 21.
And that's consistent across the board? Or is
Yes.
that question?
Yeah, all our distribution projects have been significantly increased since 2019.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Trahan, would you like to add to that at all?
Yes, I would. Between the time that I filed those written comments and today, our members had a chance to sit down at length with folks at Eversource and addressed a number of these interconnection issues and reach some satisfactory ground. And the idea is to work together to bring some solutions to the interconnection working group on this.
Thank you for that response. And I turn it back to you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank the EDCs again for their presentation and time today.
Thank you. Maybe I can pick up there, Mr. Trahan or any of the EDCs. If I could maybe express a tad bit of skepticism about our interconnection working groups. In the past, like I was a huge fan of standing them up. That was the outcome of our 6th track of the equitable modern grid, and it seemed like a very good best practice. I think we modeled after Massachusetts. But I've been a little like disappointed is too strong of a word, but let me use that here and say, like, if my recollection is correct, I think we've seen a couple of consensus recommendations come out of them. But the most consequential work to date on interconnection seems to be the work that the working group punted back to PURA to do in dockets 220629 and 220629 REO1. So I want to make sure that we're not losing too much momentum or too much time by putting that back to the working group. So any kind of reactions to that?
Yeah, I expressed a similar disappointment with moderator Eileen Cole, and they've been great. I'll take the hit mostly in that we haven't done a great job, I think, in putting enough strong issues in front of the working group and prioritizing them, at least from our perspective. I know we did that several years ago when we got the interconnection working group off the ground, but we haven't done that in the last year or a little better than a year. But we expect to provide Eileen with a list of meaty issues, and not just to bring them as a roundtable discussion during that what's become a really large group, as many as 70 or 75 people on these calls. It's really become larger than we'd expected when it was a small group of about 10 or so. We really made some good headway, but the idea is to put a ranked list of important issues in front of the working group, and not just issues, but solutions, and ask them to either act on them and have the EDCs proceed in making those changes on their own. And if PURA needs to get involved, have those issues passed your way.
Thank you, Mr. Trahan. I appreciate that. I mean, not to open a can of worms here, but there was, briefly a legislative concept in the last session dealing with mandatory interconnection timelines. And it feels a little bit like we're at a crossroads for interconnection issues across our dockets. We have some discussion here. I think the storage docket has some interconnection issues at play. So just, want to take everyone's temperature and see if there's a more universal approach that we need to be thinking through if we still, have confidence in the working group. Because I can recognize the sensitivities, both of the size of the working group, to Mr. Trahan's point, but also, these are interactions that we're having where we're, also bringing concerns at the same time we have pending applications being reviewed. So I I'm going to take the temperature of the group. If we feel confident that we have kind of a path forward here to put something in front of us that has no regret solutions or things that we need to weigh in on. Anything further here?
Well, I would just say that we're not dissatisfied with what the working group is, how they performed. I think it's just it's been frankly our lack of putting issues in front of them, to be honest. We haven't done a real good job in that. Interconnection still remains an issue, a significant issue for developers, residential and commercial developers. But the issues that we brought in front of the working group early on, utilities dealt with those swiftly, and we've just not brought those larger issues in front of the group, but we intend to do so quickly.
Okay, thank you. Eversource or UI, you want to be heard on this, Mr. Fronte?
Can't find the hand function. So sorry about that. So, Madam Chairwoman, I've been involved in the intersections for 15 years, 20 years, actually longer if you go back to my cogen years. I think, as Mr. Tran said, early on we had some great success. I think part of the frustration of the team working with Mike, and kind of say I don't want to speak for them in UI, is that the groups sometimes get sidetracked because interconnection keeps getting brought up in many different dockets, and that's been frustrating for us, quite honestly. And we feel that a lot of the issues brought up were not brought up in the group by members of developers or other stakeholders, and we could have quickly solved some of these issues without having to have dockets and interrogatories in many cases if we had a fair amount of time to solve them. So I think I hear your frustration, but we're also frustrated because I think sometimes we're spending a lot of time, dealing with questions and feel like we get sidetracked when we could have solved these problems if there was more open dialogue.
I really appreciate that feedback. Sensing that a little bit from my own read and review of comments, and then talking to my staff who are spread across dockets where we're tackling this. So I just want to make sure, one option, and I know I don't have stakeholders from every single docket that this is touched on, but one option is that we simply decline to act on any interconnection concerns that have been raised in NRES, ESS, RES, if they were there, anything else, and just say, look, we're giving you all to the end of the year to figure this out. But I was gathering you did from that reaction. But I just, if there are other creative, I just want to base here.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but because the issues to us, I know there's some issues with storage, there are some issues as far as charging, discharging, but we like to treat all interconnections, regardless of program, the same as most as possible. It's a generator. Generator maybe has a draw because of storage, but the process should be the same. We analyze it. We analyze the generators as they operate, and we'd like to not have special treatment for different programs. Like we hear a lot of questions about interconnection application for a SCEF program versus NRES program. To us, and that they're all the same to us. There's no difference. so the program, the way we take the application in, the way we process them, the way we study them, they're similar. Generators have different characteristics. We study them by their characteristics. And our biggest, and you said last time, I'm retiring tomorrow, so I'll give you my comment. So the biggest challenge, another big challenge, so I'll be quite frank, is that, as ISO New England is drawn in, we give a lot of pressure. Why are things taking so long? Why are storage projects taking so long? I see your comments, I see Pierre's comments on the large programs, but if it's over a megawatt and it's bigger than the load, it's going to be in the ISO project and it's going to require a significant upgrade. So there's nothing in the interconnection process that's going to speed that up in the Connecticut state process. It's just going to get slowed down. So if you're submitting a project that's above a megawatt, you know, and you get stuck into an ISO cluster project, it's going to slow down. If you submit a storage project on a say a warehouse, a big box store has a 750 kW transformer, and you want to put a 2 megawatt storage facility and draw from the grid, it's going to require a significant upgrade, and it may have to go in the ISO process. So what can the state do? You know, there's nothing I can do in my process or our process that's going to speed that up or lower the cost.
I think I heard you say you're retiring tomorrow, which
Yes.
was not news to your team members on the call. Thank you. Thank you for being here on your second to last day. My question was going to be, are you planning to be at the tech meeting for storage next Thursday? But I guess the answer to that is no. Okay.
Joe will be there. Joe Dennis will be there.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to keep going with this just a second, but I see you've inspired Mr. Verkler, who has a comment here. So let me cede the floor to him for a second.
Thank you. This might not be the right place to raise this, so stop. You can feel free to interrupt me if that's the case. But we have interconnection issues when it comes to them being reviewed and what they're being reviewed against. You know, we have a set of INR guidelines. We have the NEC code. And then we have the metering diagrams from the NRES program. And we do as good a job as we can with a lot of expertise in our team to match all three of those up. And then when they get reviewed and they get rejected, they're not pointing to any of those three things as to why they're being rejected. So it seems like they're being reviewed against the draft INR guidelines that are being worked on. And we've wanted there to be updated guidelines for quite a while. Because they're not as solar specific as we see in a lot of other states. And so right now we're being reviewed against details that we haven't seen. So there's no way we can actually meet those and argue against them if we feel like it's not correct. And we also feel like we should see a draft of that before it gets approved in case we have feedback. You know, we work with a lot of other utilities. We see some very good details in some other states, Illinois, Ameren utility, for example. And it doesn't sound like we're going to be given an opportunity to actually review that before it gets approved. So there's kind of a couple different pieces there. I'm not sure if this is the right place to raise this. I have brought this to Eversource's attention over the past year, and then again just yesterday. So hopefully they don't feel like I'm blindsiding them with this, but I feel like this is maybe a place to raise this. I'm sorry if it's not.
No, please. Any response from Eversource? Mr. Fonte.
Yeah, I've heard about that issue, and I brought it to my colleague Carl Novoselsky's attention, and he's going to follow up with that and see if we get them a draft. Again, it's a perfect example of we should have been a topic at the discussion in the connection meeting, and we could have addressed it earlier.
I'll also offer that that's a good example of discussions that could be advanced through a working group setting.
Yeah.
And I'll just kind of piggyback on that because I wanted to offer some additional perspective because I think interconnection is going to continue to be a big challenge for many reasons. And I don't think that it's not going to be solved by one thing. I think the ability for EDCs and the industry to collaborate in kind of an open informal setting through something like a working group is important. And that's going to produce a lot of kind of consensus strategies, many of which that can be implemented in a short time. I also think there are bigger issues, and that Pura's work in 2206, 29 remains critically important. So it's not a either or scenario. And I also agree that it's ultimately counterproductive to dive deep into interconnection matters in the annual NRES and SCEF review dockets. But but I still think it's fair to bring them up, because I think it's important to understand what the interconnection constraints are to inform program design.
That's fair, thank you. I don't want to put the developers on the spot too much here, but I gotta tell you, I'm really seriously tempted to not act on any interconnection issues being raised in any of these annual dockets until and unless the interconnection working group comes back to us by the end of the year, or some kind of date certain, and confirms that they've vetted these issues and do or don't have consensus. So I want to pause again and just make sure that folks have a chance to react to that. Any further comments or thoughts right now? All right. Mr. Malone.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the 15 years that I've been involved in the energy industry, interconnection's always been historically the biggest problem. And the timelines are always a problem. When studies are done, people drop out because of the interconnection costs. Then there's historically been a move to do a group study. Group studies really haven't helped that much unless the state is going to back it somehow, because you have a big group and half the people are willing to pay the interconnection costs, the other half aren't, then you got to do another restudy. We started experiencing this in the Midwest in MISO about 15 years ago. So unless the state kind of backs up, like if you do a group study, the state will say, all right, well, we're going to spread it out like they propose in Massachusetts. Or like they're going through the approval process now. Unless there's something like that, since the Connecticut distribution grid seems to be pretty much almost full up, except where land is too expensive, then you just won't get projects built. And I mean, just in terms of the overall process, what I've never understood, and I'm not an engineer, is with AI and algorithms and everything else that computers can do, why can't that be somehow adapted to speed up the process of interconnection? I mean, if there was a model that showed everything that is currently existing on the distribution grid, I mean, it'd be a lot easier, save a lot of time, weed out projects if somehow people could just put in their information and then all of a sudden you get a result that takes into account all the different factors. But the current process, locally and at the ISO level, it's kind of like the same old process. People submit their application, you do some kind of study. That takes a long time. Things change. You have to do restudies. I mean, without some kind of new framework, projects just won't get built because they won't be able to get the interconnection. So that's all. That's my thoughts on the topic.
Thank you. Mr. Conte?
Hi, Don. I get the frustration and the connections, and just more of a commentary again from my experience. I go back. I mentioned before. I go back to interconnections from the 1990s on cogens. There were no rules, right? So in 2018 we implemented PowerClerk, then we implemented hosting capacity, and AI just started. So I'm sure we'll be looking at that in the next coming months as far as making models go faster. I can't speak for ISO New England and the 1 megawatt and above issue, or above 1 megawatt, is out of our jurisdiction as far as the effect. But I'd just like to point out that it seems frustrating, but sometimes we forget that we have successes. We have 80,000 plus interconnections in Connecticut in CLMP territory, 1.6 gigawatts. So to say that it's a total failure is not really appropriate. I understand the frustrations, but it's also, I get frustrated when I hear developers say, I want to develop 5 acres or 5 megawatts, in Northwest Connecticut at the edge of our territory, and it's on a single phase that's 3 miles, 4 miles away, which and you can that it shouldn't be a surprise that it's going to cost monthly millions of dollars, right? So I get that. I don't understand why that's put as a problem, and it's not really a problem; it's a condition, right? So, and that's why interconnection problems, in my experience, have been cited as a problem in those types of conditions. So, in many cases. So, over my career.
Good.
Attorney Malone.
Yeah, hi. I didn't mean to imply that it's been a failure. It hasn't. I mean, I think it's just not going to work anymore going forward.
Yeah.
I mean, MISO first encountered this back in like in 2005. Eventually they realized that they needed to have some backbone interconnection interconnection upgrades to the system that had to be socialized, because if they didn't, no individual generator could actually afford the interconnection requirements, right? So if you're on the line even now in the distribution grid in Connecticut or anywhere else, if you're that project that's going to put it over the cliff, then for you to then upgrade the whole line, you're just not going to be able to do it.
It's typically like the line, Tom. I'm sorry to interrupt, but and again, we recognize that, and we recognize at the stations, right? And we've recognized that in Massachusetts. I don't know, Brian, how many years ago? 5, 6 years ago. So, the group study process is in effect in Massachusetts, and we're proposing in Connecticut. But quite typically, the problem for individual customers occurs at the station. And, we've been able to upgrade lines to accommodate multiple developers, running to a station. But the problem with prohibited costs happens when you get to the station. And, especially in Eastern Connecticut at this point. But I'll take it back. I didn't mean to imply that it's a failure. It's not a failure. I'm trying to say it was. I think the process has been, in most cases, successful up to today, where we have congested stations.
Yeah, no, it's just that you reach the natural capacity of the existing system. That's all. So you have to have a new model to then deal with that fact that you've reached the natural capacity if you want to continue to deploy renewable energy.
Great, thank you. Mr. Trahan and then Mr. Rice.
Chairman, just on the question that you asked, I don't think it's unreasonable to move or to put the interconnection ball back in the court of the interconnection working group, and we'll work through that group in the future to find solutions.
Thank you, Mr. Rice.
Yeah, and I was just going to quickly offer up the very important and interesting discussion that Attorney Malone and Dave from K were engaging in underscores my previous statement that FERA has very important work to do in 2206-29, which is really where those important questions are being addressed.
Thank you. Okay, last, maybe somewhat rhetorical question from me, and then we're going to move on in our agenda. Is anyone on the call familiar with the 100-day sprints that we ordered in the original grid mod affordability docket? Anyone participate in those? Okay. well, I hope y'all are looking forward to finding out what it is, everyone but Mr. Ferrante, who can come back in a voluntary capacity. But we essentially gave folks 4 concrete, discrete topics in that affordability docket back in the day and said, you've got 100 days to reach agreement on solutions. At the end of that 100 days, anything that you haven't reached agreement on, Pura is taking back and adjudicating, ourselves. So these are some rapid timelines that we deal with, but just want to give you some insight into something I'm suggesting has particular relevance when you're thinking about the timelines associated with the 2025 legislative session, which might be some added motivation to a sprint group to figure out. So let me leave that there. In terms of our agenda, I just want to note, even though we covered the topic of school solar, it did not get the presentation from Attorney Sharkey. So just want to provide one more opportunity to make sure we didn't miss Attorney Sharkey. I see him on the screen. Hi, sir.
I apologize, Madam Chair, if I missed the call for our presentation. So thank you for allowing me to present briefly on this topic. And if Mr. Bumpin has the slides, I have a very short slide deck that just, I think, illustrates the points that I wanted to make. Is that available? That's great. Okay, terrific. Thank you. This is not normally a topic that area cooperative educational services would comment on, or at least not a docket they would ordinarily comment on, except for the fact that there's a specific dedication to this question of solar on schools. The reason why ACES is interested is because ACES has developed a program for solar on schools in-house, which we just wanted to make you aware of, but also provide you with some experiences that ACES has had in the development of their solar on schools program under the name ACES Up. And for those of you who may not be familiar, ACES is one of the 6 regional education service centers, or RESCs, in the state of Connecticut that are created by statute back in the 1970s to provide services to their constituent school districts within their regions that they can do more efficiently than if every school district does it on their own. They were originally created back in the 70s in response to the federal mandates, the new federal mandates on special education. And that is still a primary mission of the RESCs in Connecticut, but they have a fairly broad agenda to offer any other types of programs that might be helpful to school districts in their particular geographic regions. And those have ranged from transportation services to human resources, back office kinds of things, and so on. In that spirit, ACES is the RESC for the Greater New Haven, Naugatuck Valley region up to including Waterbury. It's in that spirit that ACES developed the ACES Up program. 2.5 years ago, ACES was with the help of a DERA grant from DEEP. ACES was the first acquired and installed the charger and the first first large size EV school bus in the state of Connecticut. And they've really taken the lead on the consideration of a lot of these renewable technologies that school districts are considering installing. And so they've put solar on the roof of their transportation center, and they're putting solar on now on other of their facilities. They've installed level 2 chargers at their transportation hub, as well as in pretty much all of their owned facilities now. And the thought has been that this is a program that they could offer to other school districts around the state to provide kind of a turnkey solution through ACES that would enable school districts to do EV charging, solar, storage, fuel cells, whatever else they might be considering on a more streamlined basis. Next slide, please. Well, and so the mandates or the provisions of Section 173 of Public Act 24-151. Obviously, the legislature has mandated that PURA create a docket to promote solar on schools and storage and incorporate them into existing incentive programs. They've also given a permissive structure to perhaps create a separate tariff for these projects under this new program and allocate up to 25 megawatts specifically to schools. And what I kind of want to start out by saying here is that, solar on schools is kind of an obvious, I think intellectually, it's sort of an obvious low-hanging fruit place to put solar in most people's minds. Lots of buildings, lots available, lots of flat roofs, lots of interest in new technologies and the educational value of that. So it seems solar on schools as a concept is something that has been kicked around in the legislature for the last few years in different types of incentives, leading to this provision in Public Act 24-151. But there are a lot of unappreciated, let's put it that way, unappreciated problems that are associated with solar on schools, some of which apply to any kind of a C&I application, but some of which are unique to our public schools. And that's really what I wanted to present and suggest some solutions to today. So next slide, please. Again, the ACES Up program is, again, offered by ACES as a turnkey solution to school districts around the state, which I've already discussed. Next slide. And in the course of the work that ACES has done with school districts, I think we can broadly categorize the major obstacles to solar on schools into three different categories. There are others, I guess, but these are the primary three. The first is the local procurement process. Schools, like any municipal entity, are public entities, and therefore they're subject to public procurement processes, RFPs, what have you, that require them to handle taxpayer money efficiently. And so that process can be time consuming. It's needed, it's necessary at some level, but it's also time consuming. So for the average developer who has a choice of working with a school district, let's say, who has maybe 5 school buildings they're considering for solar, if you're working with a school district as a developer, you're going to go through a process of educating them about the options and the opportunities. But in the end, it's all going to go to an RFP. There's no guarantee that you're actually going to get the contract to install the solar on those facilities, absent some kind of a bid waiver or special exception to their purchasing process. And so if you have an option to go to a school district or to the office building down the street, you're going to choose the office building every day and twice on Sunday, because there's one owner, there's one decision maker, and decisions can be made much more simply. So for a lot of these reasons, developers, are less inclined to consider working with school districts just in general. So procurement processes is one obstacle. The second is roof conditions. And again, this applies to any kind of a CNI situation or residential for that matter. The roof conditions of a particular school will obviously vary depending upon how recently it was replaced or upgraded. And just the standards of most financing sources for solar. Generally speaking, these are 20-year contracts if they apply for an NRES or any other program. So a financier is not necessarily going to invest in a 20-year solar project with a roof that is 15 years old. If it's under 10 years, yeah, they consider it, and that's generally good to go. If it's more than 10 years, not so much. And for a lot of the school districts, there's not really a lot of incentive to make the roof solar ready unless there's some kind of compensation from, say, the school construction program from the state of Connecticut. And that's only eligible for roofs that are more than 20 years old. There is a very streamlined process in the school construction grant program called the non-priority grants, which are reviewed monthly. And they're specifically designed for smaller scale school projects like a roof overlay or minor improvements to a roof. And it's a fairly straightforward process, but it's only eligible for roofs that are more than 20 years old. So, depending upon if you're talking about the 5-building school district, maybe 2 of them might be less than 10 years old. 2 of them might be over 20 years old. Those are potentially available to do work on, subject to the older ones, subject to school construction reimbursements. But the ones between 10 and 20, perhaps not so much. And so they have to be dropped off perhaps for a future date. So understanding the conditions of the roof in any school building is key to this, and it's oftentimes an obstacle. And then finally, the NRES program itself is not very conducive to a program that is subject to the previous 2 obstacles. Because even if you're able to get through a procurement process, even if you're able to pre-screen your roof conditions, by the time you are ready, perhaps, to apply to an NRES, to the NRES program, if it's a twice-a-year auction, you've got to tell the school districts, yes, it's great that we want to go forward with solar, but we got to wait for 2 or 3 months until the portal opens, depending upon the time of year. And then we've got to wait for another 2 or 3 months for decisions to get made. And oh, by the way, there might be only a 50% chance that you're going to get approved anyway under the NRES program. So for those reasons, NRES itself is not very conducive to solar on schools. Next slide, please. So what we're offering today as part of this tech session is perhaps some suggestions about how to overcome some of those obstacles. The first I mentioned was procurement processes. As I'm saying here, it's largely unavoidable because for obvious reasons. But you could encourage, and I think, this is not necessarily Pura's job, but encouraging a multi-district approach or regional approaches, such as what ACES is offering, where one school district or a group of school districts, either a RESC on behalf of several school districts or on its own offers a program, or multiple school districts join together to do a procurement process that helps to speed up the review and the RFP process. If one district does it, we have laws in Connecticut now to promote regionalism and promote service sharing among school districts. So as long as one of the RESCs or one of the school districts has gone through a procurement, other school districts can piggyback off of that procurement process. That is actually what we're relying on with the ACES Up program. So that would be I think the way to try to overcome that obstacle. And then also perhaps provide more training for local officials to understand the limitations and the opportunities involved in solar at their schools. Next slide, please. So I also mentioned that roof conditions are a problem. There was an effort, I think, in this last legislative session proposed to promote triaging or evaluating existing roof conditions as sort of a precursor to a Solar on Schools program. I think it was a little bit heavy-handed. It was essentially a mandate on school districts to conduct, roof evaluations on every one of their schools, which of course was objected to by just about every school district in the state. But the spirit of it, I think, was correct in that we need to break through this problem. Districts need to understand what the conditions and have a good inventory of what their roof conditions are currently like and what their plan is for potential replacements in the context of solar, because we can't really deploy solar on schools unless we really do have a good idea in advance of what the conditions of the roofs are. So I'm suggesting, triaging the roofs into these three categories. One, if it's under 10 years, it's ready to go, solar ready, roof ready for solar. If they are older than 20 years, well, start putting applications together for the non-priority grant under the school construction program at DAS. And then, if they fall into that middle ground, then hold it until it's either over 20 years or maybe it's going to be part of a larger renovation project. But help school districts understand that if they want to do solar, they've got to take these factors into consideration. Next slide, please. And finally, which I think is the one I wanted to leave you with, is that I think if we have an opportunity and actually a mandate from the legislature to consider, a separate program for solar on schools, I would suggest that perhaps I know the mandate is to incorporate it into the existing programs that are available, but I think that there may be enough bandwidth within that authorization or that mandate to consider it as a separate program with separate standards. If the chairman remembers, you participated in a forum in front of the Energy and Technology Committee on February 23rd of this year, which was discussing what other states are doing as part of a discussion about what the successor programs to NRES and RES might look like. And in addition to your presence there, along with Deputy Director Josh Ryer, Director Ryer at that time, we had experts who have experience in other states come and present to the committee. And I think particularly on the CNI side, the one standard that was offered as a industry standard, if you will, in other states is to consider a different approach to deploying capacity for solar installations in CNI locations. And that was paraphrased as a first ready approach, where instead of conducting auctions and soliciting applications from anyone and everyone with fairly minimal standards for readiness of the project, instead you conduct a process that actually requires a lot of boxes to be checked before the application actually gets submitted. And if it's distributed on a block basis, as this happens in other states, if you've checked all the boxes and you're ready to go, you can be sure that you will get funded. and you'll get an allocation under that program. The concept, as I said, is described as a first ready approach, as opposed to a first in line or just a random auction. This addresses a lot of the problems that I pointed out as obstacles earlier, because in theory, if you applied this to a new solar in schools program, you've done the procurement process, sure, but then you've also done the triaging for the roofs, and you know that these are the roofs that are ready to go if I'm awarded, and you've certified that before you actually make your application. And if you've checked all those boxes and you've got all that in place, you can proceed to getting funding for that project. That makes a big difference, not just financially for a developer, but also psychologically for a school district that doesn't understand this stuff to begin with. To be told that, well, you have to wait, you have to apply, then wait, then you might not get funded. Here, if you do everything that you're supposed to do in advance, you're likely to get funded because you've done all that homework in advance, and so it's openly available. I would suggest respectfully that was a proposal that was made back in February for a successor for whatever the NRES successor program might be, a first ready approach. And I might suggest that maybe in meeting the mandate from the legislature to promote a solar on schools program, that maybe you essentially pilot that concept to the 25 megawatts that the legislature has authorized for solar on schools, to promote solar on schools, see how it works. Perhaps it's applicable then to the larger NRES world here in Connecticut, or the successor program. That would make a big difference. I'll just say in closing that under the ACES Up program, what ACES has essentially done is figure out workarounds to the NRES program, adapting some new technologies involving energy storage, and then cobbling together the various incentives from in terms of rates that are available from the EDCs, but then attaching to that the ESS program opportunity, and then the ITC demand response. There's all of the other financial incentives and depreciation, all the other pieces that can come together to make a program and make a project pencil, and frankly, avoid the NRES program entirely. And we've had success doing that. We're actually going to start construction in about a week on, I think it's 3 different roofs on a school that we started out with just earlier this year, and we're not even applying under NRES for those programs, which is a shame, but that is the way that we've found. That's the mousetrap that we've built to avoid some of the vagaries that the NRES program presents, particularly to school applications. So, I think to the extent that there is a mandate from the legislature, public policy mandate to promote solar in schools, I think a different mousetrap for under the NRES structure might be a way to go. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Sharkey. If my staff have any brief questions, we can take those, recognizing that we're butting up to the end of the time we have scheduled here. Any questions for Mr. Sharkey?
I just have a couple of questions, Madam Chair. So I'd like to thank Mr. Sharkey for his presentation and time today. So could you please turn to slide 4? So my first question, I was wondering if Mr. Sharkey could please elaborate on the specific components or requirements of the NRES program that present the greatest challenges for schools seeking to install solar, and why?
The auction process is problematic. schools have their own schedules, unlike a commercial building. Schools have their own school calendars and school schedules that they have to abide by. But the fact that there is a delay involved in waiting for an auction to occur, then and exerting a lot of energy and time in preparing an NRES application, then waiting another 2 or 3 months for a decision to be rendered as to whether your particular project or projects are being funded. Then, and even then, only having certainly, maybe a 1 in 2 chance of even getting your project funded under NRES. These are all major deterrents. And if you're a developer, you're going to a school district and saying, okay, well, we've done everything we're supposed to do, and we've submitted into this incentive program to enable us to do this project. But sorry, we didn't get it. Then what do you do? Well, do you wait another 4 months until the next window opens? How much time goes by? And that's not unlike any CNI building owner who might be considering, or business owner who might be considering solar, but it's particularly problematic for schools because boards of ed change, policies change, things happen as you wait a year or more to get these things off the ground. So the auction process in and of itself is what is, I think, an obstacle to getting solar off the ground.
Thank you for that response. So my next question, does ASUS have any data on the typical size of a school solar project in Connecticut?
It doesn't have its own data collected, but ASUS can certainly provide you with examples of what it has been either discussing or conducting for schools under the ASUS program. I can say generally, these are projects that run, some of them might be eligible for the small category under NRES, but the bulk of them fall into the middle, the medium-sized category.
I appreciate that response. And so my final question, would ASUS be able to provide any insights into the overall interest in school solar deployment across Connecticut to date?
Not currently. It's been sort of, they've been sort of slowly rolling out an awareness of this availability of this program, which is now going to step up this fall with a more aggressive marketing effort. And we've had actually discussions about doing a kind of a statewide survey of school districts to kind of find out and gauge what the level of interest might be from school districts. Anecdotally, I can tell you that every school district is thinking about it and considering it if they haven't done it already. And the biggest obstacle is, well, all the ones I've mentioned today, and just the complexity of it. It's too much. It's a lot of complexity for the average school administrator to handle on their own without the staff who are educators. Their staff are educators, not necessarily facilities directors who really understand how solar works. So, though they would love to do it, it's just too much for them to get their heads around, which is why ASUS has promoted the ASUS Up program to kind of take that off their shoulders. But the response from anybody we've spoken to, ASUS has received unsolicited queries about all types of solar and other renewables. But we're thinking about doing our own survey to kind of really fully gauge that.
Thank you for that response, and those are all my questions. So thank you, Mr. Sharkey, for your time again today, and I turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Sharkey, let me echo Mr. Arpin's thanks, and I appreciate the presentation.
Sure. And as the new docket for the schools on Solar on Schools program gets formed, we'd love to participate in that as well.
Thank you. Although I might clarify that I think we revised the notice of proceeding for this docket to indicate that we would be considering it here. So I think you are participating.
Oh, terrific. Okay.
But well, I can confirm that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have had some really productive conversations today, a lot of good presentations and discussion. I think we've had a lot of time for comment. So seeing that we have gotten through all of the topics on the agenda, let me just remind folks of the procedural dates that are listed for the remainder of this docket at the bottom of the agenda. Unless there are any closing administrative matters to consider, I'm going to bring us toward adjournment since we kind of powered through without a break here. All right, seeing none. Again, on behalf of myself and my colleagues, I want to thank everyone for their presentations and engagement today. And wish you all a good rest of the afternoon.